Agenda is Birmingham Code Lien Foreclosure Ordinance, and Director Thomas will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Council. Hope everyone is well. I will be co-presenting this with Attorney Jim Stanley. Again, my name is Katrina Thomas, and I have the pleasure of serving as Director of the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. And I know this has been a long-awaited item to come before you as a tool to help us with foreclosing on properties that have code enforcement liens on them. And so I'm excited to bring this to you. It gives us a stronger tool to address one of the most persistent and challenging issues in our neighborhoods, and that's vacant, blighted, and abandoned properties that really just continue to drain our city resources and destabilize our communities. So, as you know, we already spend a lot of resources trying to abate these nuisances. Under the current system, many of these problem properties just simply fall through the cracks. We issue liens, but those liens often sit unpaid. They sit for years, and those properties continue to decay. And then meanwhile, neighbors that live next door to these unsafe structures and overgrown lots and repeat nuisance activities, they want answers. So this is a part of the tool. Many tools that we currently use, but this will help us with those problem properties. And so, as you know, our city's code enforcement process currently involves the demolition of these unsafe structures and also cutting overgrown weeds and enforcing our building and property maintenance codes. And like I stated before, we put liens on these properties, but oftentimes these liens go unpaid and they stall out for years. Under the current state law, we are authorized to assess these liens against the property, but there's really not a very effective way to enforce those liens. And so our costs end up being just pretty unrecoverable. So in plain language, and Attorney Stanley is here as well to take a deeper dive into this. Some of you may recall that the Center for Community Progress came to the city a few months back. We had a scholarship in which they helped us to sort of unpack this. I want to thank Councilor Smitherman and also Councilor Clark in spearheading that effort. And it did allow us to just drill down on what this really means for us. So in plain language, this only applies to, it applies only to non-owner occupied properties. And so it ensures that owner occupied properties are exempt so that families will not lose their home through this process. The city can foreclose if liens remain unpaid for more than 6 months. Again, owner occupied properties are fully protected, and this is a judicial process that targets the property and not the person. A lot of our current enforcement efforts were going after the person, but this is a tool in which it allows us to go after the property itself. And then we can acquire the property if no one bids at the sale. So our current process to recover costs for building and property code maintenance liens, the state law provides really no enforcement mechanism for these types of enforcements. But for weed abatement assessments, we do transmit some of those to the tax collector to add to the tax bill, but approximately 75% of these properties are tax delinquent. And the city typically recover less than 30% of the total cost of those weed abatement properties. And then for demolition liens, the state law does provide a process for that as well. The foreclosure doesn't really result in clear title. This legislation does allow us to get clear title. And then with those demolitions, there are rarely any purchasers at the foreclosure sale. And as a result, the demolition lien becomes only a cloud on the title, which makes the property even less attractive to a potential purchaser. So just want to go back through some of the strategies that we'll use to target these properties. Again, we know we have a lot of these properties that exist throughout the city, so we cannot target all of them. We will have to be very strategic in the properties that we target. But again, these are not owner-occupied properties. These are properties that will have outstanding code or nuisance liens. It does allow us the ability to focus on repeat offender properties, so properties that have had nuisance abatements on them for 3 years in a row. It will allow us to abate those as well through this process. And then we would want to target non-tax delinquent properties, and that just allows us to avoid the expense of having to pay those tax liens. We would want to look at properties that have the potential for productive reuse. Again, this is really about assembling properties, identifying properties that we can put in the hands of people who would be better stewards of those properties, because we know that a lot of these properties cause neighborhood harm. So areas where we see the potential, we would like to go after those. Really, some of this you already know, and what the impact of these vacant properties is doing in our communities. They harm the physical health and emotional well-being of neighbors. We see that there's a high volume of violent crime where these properties are in our communities. They reduce the surrounding property values. They decrease municipal tax revenues, and there's an increase in municipal costs, including police and fire. And so we would like to be able to use this tool to build a strong foundation. The political support, having clear goals and effective project management is important. We have identified a staff person who will be a project manager on the code enforcement side for this. We know that public education and community engagement will be key to make sure our residents understand. Having organized and accurate data will support this effort, as well as adequate funding and staff capacity. We did do a preliminary look at some properties that are eligible. I don't know if you can read that, but we identified, when the Center for Community Progress was here, we identified approximately 579 non-tax delinquent properties with demolition liens, and that those properties had a total lien balance of more than $3.8 million, and then properties with weed costs, it was over 6,600 of those properties with a total lien balance of more than $3.6 million. So again, these are costs that we are unable to recover effectively, and this legislation, actually it was adopted by the state last year. Senator Madison Coleman spearheaded this legislation, and what's before you today is a local ordinance that will allow us to enforce it. The data for this ordinance will be key. Again, identifying any outstanding demolition liens, as well as years and amounts, the tax delinquency status and the history, any homestead exemption status that may exist, because again, we are not targeting any properties that are owner occupied, and also the assessed property value data would be needed. Obviously, partners in this will be the Land Bank Authority. Properties that end up coming back to us, we will have the ability, if we wanted to transfer some of that to the land bank, and they already have a process in place that will allow them to market these properties. And then our local and regional developers will be key as well. How we leverage that technology, you all may recall that we do now partner with Ptolemy, and they have a building blocks program that will allow us to use that platform to showcase these properties. We'll be able to use our GIS system and also filter and prioritize properties using those key data points that I mentioned, analyze that data with neighborhood value and complaint overlays, and also generate property profiles. This is a sample of the Ensley neighborhood and what we were able to pull from it. It may be difficult to read it, but we can give a copy of the presentation as well. But as you can see in this, just in this portion of Ensley, the properties that are in blue are parcels with unpaid demolition liens that are not tax delinquent. The parcels in red are parcels with unpaid demolition liens, but are also tax delinquent. And again, those are probably more feasible to take the land bank route for those. And then, as you see, the predominant color here is the orange color, which are properties that have weed bill liens on them. And this is just a sample of the Inslee area. So in terms of next steps, we do realize that education around this ordinance is key to educate our residents and our stakeholders about the ordinance, coordinating with the Office of the City Attorney to process all of the details. Again, developing the criteria for identifying and prioritizing lots and aligning our strategies with the current neighborhood revitalization strategies that are happening in these communities, and then report back to you all with the implementation roadblock. So in short, really this ordinance is about accountability. It ensures that absentee owners, speculators, and irresponsible landlords cannot just walk away from their obligations while leaving the city and our resources and our residents to bear the burden. It's not, you can call it a punishment, but it's really not about punishment. It's about just restoration and recovering. It's about protecting our neighborhoods and recovering the costs that our taxpayers fund for cleaning up these properties and making sure that every property in Birmingham contributes to the strength of our communities. And again, Jim Stanley is the author a lot around this legislation. And so we did provide a copy of the actual ordinance in your packet. And both of us are here to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. I'll start off. So, looking at section 3, it sets out the circumstances under which the city would pursue the foreclosure. And specifically section 3B, that's on page 4 of this draft that you have. So it's been my observation that oftentimes our municipal code liens are not recorded in close proximity to when those abatement actions occur. You know, we regularly have the assessments on our council agendas for us to approve, and oftentimes those abatement actions could have been performed 2, 3, 4, 5 years earlier. So I realize that, you know, probably, I'd say even the majority of these properties, you know, have had multiple code enforcement action abatement, you know, performed on them, you know, previously. So, you know, for some of the properties that we would seek to do this foreclosure on, there may be, you know, liens recorded, but one of the challenges that I can see is that, you know, there's a property that's causing harm to a neighborhood. There's been abatement action, but the lien has not been recorded in the probate office because we sometimes have this big gap of time. So just wanted to point that out as a potential challenge. The other thing I wanted to ask is, if we're to pursue this, is there a cost to the city associated with, you know, carrying out this foreclosure? And I assume this has to go to probate court. And so are there court costs or otherwise that are associated with foreclosure?
Yeah, so we'll tag team that. I'm glad you brought up the first point about the backlog of cases that you see on the council agenda where the abatement may have occurred years before we do the assessment. As you know, code enforcement came under the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits in 2022, and we started looking at that and realized that it's an administrative burden because we're dealing with thousands of properties. I am pleased to inform you that we have about 1,600 assessments left. So I think last week's council agenda, there were several hundred of those. We will break those down so that over the next few months, up until February, you may see 300 a month. And then after that, we will be completely caught up with all of the assessments that were in the old weed bill. Our new system that we're using now, Acela, will allow us to track that more efficiently. And so we will be officially caught up within the next 6 months on those assessments so that it's no longer a wide gap in between the time that we abate and the time that we assess the lien. But thank you for raising that point, and then Attorney Stanley can address the court costs associated with this process.
Yes, Councilor Quinn, you're correct. The court costs are a part of the proceeding. It's a circuit court case heard before a judge, so there will be fees for filing and serving notice and the other court costs they have. When the property goes through the sale, a minimum bid will require that those costs be paid as part of a bid for somebody who wants to buy the property.
So, is there an estimate? I mean, I know when the land bank clears title on properties, the typical cost per property is around, ballpark $7,000. Would it be similar for this type of foreclosure?
Yeah, I think they charge $5,000 all in for their foreclosures. It would be similar. I think initially we're looking at using in-house attorneys, which will lower that cost a good bit. But when we scale it up, we probably will be looking at outside counsel, so those costs will be included.
Okay. Another question. So Section 7 talks about the redemption component. So at any point during the process, interested party can redeem the property. I guess my question is, if someone chooses to redeem the property, they're essentially resetting the clock. So I can envision a situation where, interested party comes forward, pays the lien, and yet nothing changes in terms of, maintaining the property or the whole purpose behind the lien in the first place. And there's, I guess there's, under the circumstances that would, in which we would proceed with this foreclosure, there's, mention of the property has been subject of nuisance abatements 3 times within a 36-month period. So, I'm just wondering, what, if somebody chooses to redeem the property, is there anything here that, changes their behavior? You would think if they're, paying a lien, which, has to be more than $1,500, that would be sufficient reason for them to not get back in that situation. But, I guess I'm just asking this, Councilor Clark.
Thank you, President O'Quinn. So for me, I kind of like that. I sort of flagged that too. And my reason is because of heirs property, like where it's really, if I inherited properly, inherited property from ancestors who did not have a will, and it's 6 or 7 of us, and I get stuck paying the taxes all the time and having to mow it every 2 weeks, but the others don't participate. I don't own any more than they own, so it's a losing proposition, and probably, a bad business decision personally to be responsible. And I think in Birmingham, we have a lot of property like that, and right now the laws do not favor the tax redemption laws don't favor heirs. They can't buy the heir property for taxes. They're like forbidden. So I feel like this might be an avenue where, because it does say any interested party. So, if this is someone's family land and they could never get it, agree with their heir, their siblings or cousins or whoever, one person might have an opportunity to come back and reconnect with that land by paying the fees and might be financially capable of taking it forward. That's kind of like the only thing I really see that I like about it, because there is no other avenue for heirs. Once they become irresponsible for whatever reasons, they don't really have a chance through the law to come back and get that property. So just throw.
I can add that too. With our court proceeding, it will be the first time a lot of people with interest in the property are really notified there's a problem. The statutory notice requirements are not set up to ensure that everybody that has an interest in the property gets notice. The notice goes out to the last person to assess the property for taxes for most of the abatements. We do a title search for demolitions, and so there is a broader notice. But for other types of abatement, it's just notice to the people who assess the property for taxes, which is often less, much less than the number of people who have an actual interest in the property.
Okay. Other questions? Council Clark.
Thank you. So you alluded to some due process that would be afforded to all these interested parties. And you talked about our condemnation, which has a lot of procedural steps. Do you envision this? And I know we're just talking about the law that enables us to do anything with this right now, but, Katrina talked about some ideas about the strategy, but will we model this process after the condemnation process? Or do we have to go, 30-day notice, 60-day notice, all that stuff before what do you envision? Or is that another recommendation that comes to the council on the process?
Well, this process kicks in at the end of the process you described there. Those procedures, to a large extent, are required by statute on the front end when you're going through the declaring it a nuisance, determining the remedy, assessing the cost. This will come in after that. But this is the first time that we know everybody with interest in the property will actually get notices or an issue, and they'll have a chance to come in and redeem if, they were there in the first place and wanted to actually keep the property and keep it maintained.
Okay, so the front end administrative process kind of mirrors that condemnation process. But the action we're taking is not to tear it down because we've already torn it down, so.
Right.
I wanted to ask about section 3, and this is section 3, number C, subsection 4, where it says a lien foreclosure action will allow the property which is subject of the lien foreclosure action to be used for a public use upon foreclosure. And so does that prohibit a private redevelopment of the property? by saying it's to be done for a public use? Just one? Oh, it meets at least one, thank you. Okay,
That would be the case in case there's a property that's strategic for the city for a public municipal project, to not have to wait for multiple abatements, nuisance liens to go through the foreclosure.
okay. All right, good. That's very important, because I was thinking, wow, you're not gonna ever get to do this. Do we have a handle on the inventory of vacant lots that this could apply to? I know you gave us an example, but I'm thinking about, there might be 15,000 vacant lots with demolition liens. Of course, some of them might be in floodplains and places where we really don't need to, even if it's demand-driven, those don't need to be acted upon because they don't need to be developed. But do we have a sense of the universe that this could potentially apply to? Is it limited by anything?
Not currently. We are gathering that data now, going through multiple systems that we use to cross-reference that data and geocode them so that we are only targeting the properties that will be eligible for implementation under this SB 9 legislation. But at the same time, we're also identifying properties that may have already been foreclosed on, and those properties may be likely suitable for the land bank. So we're triaging properties now to determine what is the actual amount of properties that will be eligible for this. But it is a lot of properties that are out there, and there are also property owners that are they're making installment payments towards liens that are on the property now, and so we are eliminating those as well. So we're wanting to make sure that we are identifying those properties that have those unpaid liens on them, and also removing any properties that may be tax delinquent. We'll keep those in our back pocket, but at the same time, recognizing that that may not be the most this may not be the most effective tool for those properties, considering that we will have to pay those tax liens first. But we're still considering those as well.
So tax delinquent as in tax lien or tax deed? Because tax deed, we could get those, couldn't we? Maybe.
It's a little interesting.
Yeah, if it's tax delinquent, because taxes have priority over our municipal liens, the taxes have to be addressed.
Okay.
This can apply either for a tax deed sale or a tax lien sale. And, Jefferson County switched to selling tax liens instead of actually selling the property in 2021. And we've seen some challenges with that. For example, a tax lien purchaser has no right to possess the property. So our code enforcement people have approached those purchasers, and they can say, we can't do anything about it because we've got no right to be on the property. But this will let us act in either case, either with the old tax sale before 2021 or tax lien sale since then.
And if we were working with developers on a demand basis, then they may be willing to dissolve the tax interest or the tax delinquency or whatever. Okay. So Katrina mentioned, and I'm sorry, it's Thomas, right? I would say Miss Thomas, but I wasn't sure. So you mentioned the demolition, the vacant lots that have already had a foreclosure on them. And I know we used to do this foreclosure once they got to be 6 years old under the old law. Mike Flegel used to go across the park and do some kind of foreclosure that did not clear the title. If they've been foreclosed, and he did this like clockwork, when they got 6 years old, I know the years I was here, he did it. does that foreclosure did not clear the title or create insurable title? Can those be foreclosed on again under this new, better foreclosure?
If those were done properly, the lien would be extinguished, so we won't have a lien to go on. There are quite a few out there that really didn't go through the actual process that we can still look at. But if there's been a true foreclosure, the lien is extinguished. It doesn't result in clear title, and there may be other avenues if it's tax delinquent or, whatever the case is, to address those properties, subsequent weed assessments. But if there's been a foreclosure, the lien is considered extinguished.
So that's a lot of property, wouldn't you say? Isn't that a lot of parcels?
There are quite a few, yeah. A number of those many years ago were assessed in the city's name, even though we didn't have clear title. And those are maybe the biggest challenge.
I remember because Arrington gave the housing authority a bunch of those lots, and they were fuming mad because they built houses on some of them, and they didn't have clear title. But I'm wondering, what can we do with those? Because they're out there, and they're like, we kind of own them, but we kind of don't own them. I mean, okay, that's another challenge for another day, but I think we should, I'm really excited about this because I feel like if we don't figure out how to steward land better, look at other models like community land trusts where maybe communities could be awarded some properties to take care of instead of the city having to do it. I just think we got to get real strategic, and even with the stuff we do mow and spray, we probably need maybe planning could give us some kind of land stewardship zones, like next to streams, we just let it go wild and don't spray it, or floodplains, we just have to educate the citizens that, look, this is going to be high. It's going to grow high. It's no point in mowing it because it needs to drink some of this water. That's, oh, you are, okay, thank you.
Council Williams.
Thank you, Jim, Katrina, this is great. I'm very excited about this. Thank you both for your work. I think it's wonderfully written, and it sounds like that you've, in your department, have done a lot of in-depth followed through and thought this through, because it's very clear every question we have, y'all have already thought through the process. So thank you both for this. When would you like us to vote on this? When, when do you want it to go through council? Are y'all in a time crunch?
We're not, but this is, it is something that we would like to implement sooner than later. It is not a short-term solution. There is still a process associated with this. And so we are looking at ways to start with implementing this. So if you want to take some time to look at the ordinance longer, you're certainly welcome to do that. It's to your pleasure. But as soon as it's adopted, we're ready to move ahead with it.
Pretty short and concise. It's not that long of an ordinance, but so whenever y'all are ready, I think that I'm all for it.
Councilor Tate has a question.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, I'm curious to know how many people own some of these properties that live right here in Birmingham? Because I think what Councilor Williams is saying, this is, I like this, but if you got to a property and you foreclose and somebody just popped up and say, oh, I want, to retain my property, what measures are put in place to make sure that if you're going to keep this property, and it probably looks like most of the stuff that's in the community, like what's the enforcement there to make sure that these people bring these properties, back to how they need to be looking in community?
There are no different enforcement mechanisms. They'd be, back under the same regime before. I think if they come up with the cost to pay off the lien, there's going to be a strong incentive not to let it go back through that process where they may have to come back again and do that. But you just aggressive, regular code enforcement would limit that.
Yeah, because I know when you get to looking around, most of these people live right here in Birmingham and have left these properties in the shape that they're in, in community, which is totally unfair, to people that, pay taxes and maintain their homes, and you got people that are living in la-la land in their nice cushy communities, and people are stuck to deal with this. So, that's my question is, if it gets to that point where you're about to foreclose and then somebody pops up and, it's almost like the what if, why were you not taken care of? Because we witnessed this even with some of the abatement process and watching people come here and want their items removed, off the abatement list. So where have you been all this time? So just curious to know, like, some moving parts there for those who kind of like own these properties like that are right here.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Attorney Stanley stated, that is a challenge. Obviously, we do want these properties to go into the hands of people that will be better stewards of them, and that's the whole reason why they're in this process, is because they had not been good stewards of those properties. So where we can enforce that, we will utilize those strategies. For those properties that do not get purchased in the foreclosure sale, those would come back to us. Those could go to the land bank, and we do realize that there can be some teeth there to put some contingencies on development so that they have a time frame by which they do something with the property. But to Councilor Clark's point, we do recognize that although our goal is to go vertical on these lots with infill development, that there are other opportunities that may be temporary or can be used in the interim that may not be infill development, but may be some other type of passive use on the property. And we are exploring those options now in terms of having a menu of available options for particular neighborhoods and typologies. But there's a lot of education around that's needed as well. The work that we're doing in Councilor Clark's district on the native plant species, that helps as well to identify some additional options that are available so that we do not continue to use our resources on abating private property nuisances. So we're looking at that. But thank you for bringing up that point. We do recognize that a lot of these property owners are here locally. Again, a lot of them are heir properties, like we stated before, where no one wants to take full responsibility for taking care of the property. But a lot of these properties are also out-of-state owners, in which, we have had challenges with going after those owners. And so this tool, again, will allow us to go after the property itself, which is a different strategy that we haven't had in place before. And then there's also a 60-year title, right, associated with this process. So we should be able to identify any persons with interest in this property. So we'll make sure that we find them for sure. But thank you for bringing that up.
I got a question, I'll come back to you, but, so the circumstances where this would apply is the property's not owner occupied, has a unpaid municipal lien for at least 6 months, and then at least one of the other circumstances. So you showed in your presentation a map of Inslee, which leads me to believe that you guys have run some numbers. Apart from Inslee, do you guys have an estimate of how many properties are across the entire city that right now this would potentially apply to?
Not yet. We are very close to getting that number. Again, last week we started assembling a lot of this data. We did some preliminary work with the Center for Community Progress when they were here, which is how we were able to get this sample. But we have not completed that for the entire city, not to this level to compare tax delinquency against the type of abatement, but that is something that we are actively working on.
Okay. Would it be safe to assume that that total number is in the thousands?
Multiple
Easily,
thousands,
multiple thousands?
Yes.
All right. So that gets to my next question. So a lot of properties, court proceedings to go through the foreclosure, the cost associated with it. So I would assume that there also has to be some sort of strategy. And can you speak to, how to best utilize this tool in terms of, making the most of our efforts?
Yeah, so, I thought it was a slide that spoke to that a little bit. But, there are thousands of properties that fit this category. But we recognize that there's a cost associated with it. But there's also staff resources that are needed for this. When we initially identify a potential place to start, we said maybe 100 properties to pilot first, and see what that process looks like, how long it takes, so that we can scale it appropriately. But we do recognize that once we have all the data and have the Ptolemy building blocks, be able to filter out key data points, overlay that over some of our strategic opportunity areas where we see a lot of complaints, areas where there may be vacant lots that we can assemble for a full redevelopment project. There are multiple options where we can narrow this down geographically so that we can target the right properties that would be beneficial to us as a city. But also the education piece will allow us to educate the property owner next door to say, hey, this property is available for you to purchase, so that those snag-a-tooth lot situations that we see, those can be addressed by our residents, recognizing that there is power in land ownership, that maybe it's not a large development, but maybe other anchor institutions or just residents can step up and purchase some of these properties, so that building blocks data that tool will allow us to sort of market these properties, so that there's an open database for these properties and where they exist, so that anyone who has an opportunity can to take a look at them.
Okay. Councilor Clark, you had a question?
Yeah, it was a comment about strategy, so thanks for, you led there. You mentioned anchor institutions, and I think about the Caraway property that the city partnered in. The conveyance of that campus, they were in the practice of just buying lots all around them and sort of land banking them and caring for them while they were operating. So there may be other hospitals like Princeton, or, the Housing Authority has a, Thrive 2035 plan to redevelop several of its communities. And while their property sits in its present form, the lots probably don't have any demand, but once they redeveloped it, they would have a demand for it. So maybe they could, because what I'm thinking about is, how do we get people to help us maintain the land and steward it so that it's clean and green and not offensive to the neighborhood, but not on the taxpayers? Like, who else is interested or might have a future use for the land? So I'll just use Illiton Village for an example, not just because it's in my district, but it is slated for redevelopment, and vacant lots around it. I mean, there's a lot of vacancy around it. And it seems like if they picked up some lots around Illiton under this, power or whatever, that the incremental costs for them to mow Illaton Village and just go and hit 20 lots around it would not be a big incremental cost on their part. But then, once they redevelop the property, they're going to need those scattered sites to do housing. So, and it'll be a catalyst for that area. Just thinking, like, maybe there are partners like that could subscribe to this and take pieces that might be strategic for them down the line, or, okay.
Pro Tem Alexander?
Thank you very much. I do want to echo the compliments that have been provided already so far about this ordinance and the work that you've done to bring this to us so that we can move forward with community revitalization and just trying to beautify and make those properties just off of our tax, our dollar base, okay? So I did want to talk about strategy, and I know you may not have already have developed this, but when the education piece that we're talking about and educating the residents, for example, I have a church in District 7 that, what do they call it? They leased a lot because it was a very overgrown lot next to them. They've done this over a period of time, and now it's not being redeveloped, or there's nothing going on with that. And then when you saw the example that Councilor Clark gave about, we may have other organizations or partners that want to try to redevelop, and this will be helpful. Yes, and that would be, helpful to us. Base, or will there be a posting? How would I know if I'm this resident and I have this awful lot next to me, or I'm on this street that is terribly snaggletooth? How would I find out what are the status of those that I may want to consider buying those or trying to go through this process? Is there a strategy around that?
Yes, absolutely. So that was one of the top priorities that when the Center for Community Progress was here, they stated that we cannot do this without education. So we will develop that education strategy, just really letting our citizens know what this is and what it isn't. We want to make sure that they recognize that this is not an attempt to take owner-occupied properties, but this is a tool that can empower the neighborhood to do something about these problem properties. And so in terms of that education, it will be multiple tools. So us speaking to the community, having that database available, and then sort of having that menu of options available. And that might be a block-by-block situation or a project that the neighborhood association or the community take on to really get involved in this process so that they can help identify these properties as well. But the database will help, our education would help with that as well, and then recognizing what's the appropriate path. For some people, it may be tax delinquent properties that we will partner with the land bank. For other properties, we can utilize this tool as well. So it will be a wide range of education, but it will start at the neighborhood level so that block by block, we identify these problem properties and then figure out where they are in the process. And if it's in a state, in a situation like this where it's an unpaid lien and there's nothing really else that we can do to repurpose it or put it in the hands of another owner, then we can walk through those steps with them to get it transferred over through one of these processes.
Thank you, and I am glad to hear about the neighborhood as being one of the community partners in this, and the engagement and the help they can give us in giving this knowledge to residents and become a vital partner in helping us to get this information out. So thank you. I look forward to it. I'm sure there are 9 of us who are equally looking forward to it and want to be a part of that, getting the message out there. And so thank you. So any of those tools, I look forward to those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is this still the case that we're going to cut the overgrown lot and then place the lien? Okay, so how would we don't have, I wish we had a ton of robots, or, robotic workers for public works, because we still have right-of-ways and stuff. So how are we going to prioritize cutting right-of-ways, working with Park and Rec to cut our parks and this? What's going to be the priority for it?
So we'll continue our existing efforts. As you know, it's a lot of property that's out there. So Public Works, they are responsible for the city's right-of-ways, alleys, all of those public areas. And then Park and Rec has their portion for neighborhood parks and planning, engineering, and permits. We are responsible for the private lot nuisances that we continue to cut. And then Land Bank is also a partner where they now have contractors who are cutting their properties as well. We receive a lot of complaints about overgrown lots. So we're not at a place where I think we're just willing to just stop. We have to try to continue to address that more effectively and efficiently. That will be looking at our local ordinance and speeding up that process. This bill will help us have a longer-term strategy on addressing those properties, but it is a lot of properties that are out there. For the private lots, in some cases, we're only able to get to those lots once a year because of the volume. And so just managing expectations so that the neighbors understand what our challenges are. And then again, as we stated, bringing them to be part of the solution to help. And maybe they can take ownership of some of these lots. That will help as well. And then all the other strategies to go clean and green, as Councilor Clark stated, where we look at other options so that we're not just continuing to use our resources on cutting. But that's where we are. We were able to align our efforts, and we're still aligning our efforts during the emergency weed abatement process that we're under now. And so we're seeing how working strategically together and coordinating, going through different areas at the same time, how that helps with clearing a lot of the nuisances that we see with overgrown lots. But that's just a challenge that we have with the number of lots that we have. And it's just, population decline over the years, and people have just abandoned their properties and just don't realize the effect that still has on the neighbors who are still here. And so this is part of that answer to that.
So does that mean, will there be a certain crew, or will we continue to get third-party contractors specifically to help us with just this?
Yes, we'll continue our current efforts of weed abatement that we do now.
Okay,
with
so
contractors.
since I think the goal is to have this implemented October 1st, and I think the emergency weed abatement ends October 7th, technically, could they kind of overlap over each other? Could we start doing that?
So for these, for the weed abatements that we do now, we'll continue to do those weed abatements. This tool will not pick up until they get to a point where they don't pay those liens.
Okay.
So we'll still continue our existing code enforcement and weed abatement and demolition abatement process. This kicks in when the owner does not pay off those liens.
Okay. Because I was thinking, if it's gotten so high to the point it's almost as tall as all 9 of us, wouldn't have gotten to the point that they haven't paid. I'm just trying to see how we can speed up certain things. Like, I just got called today about a lot in South Titusville that we only cut maybe once a year. And I don't think we've gotten to that point. Just trying to find some relief for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will be, we're working with the Office of the City Attorney now to look at ways that we can streamline our current process and still stay within the state law. Because as you know, I think it goes, these lots for weed abatement, for instance, it goes to the council 3 times to set a public hearing, and then the notice of a public hearing to authorize abatement. And we're looking to see if we can combine that so that it's one resolution that we declared a nuisance and authorize abatement in the same resolution. And maybe that can be one way that we streamline just our current process to speed it up a little bit. But we're looking at that now.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. First thing first, I just want to tell y'all, thank y'all for this ordinance. I think that, it definitely gives us another tool to be able to use to address some of these major issues that we have in our city. First neighborhood that comes to mind for me is Inglenook, which is a neighborhood that, has several vacant lots that, you know, are constantly in need of, you know, cutting. And so I know I saw where you said that you all would be piloting with 100. Is that 100 per district, or is that just 100 period? Because, like, I want to say in that neighborhood specifically, I think we had counted upwards of 300 properties that were in need of, you know, being abated and having to be cut. And I'm pretty sure everybody else can identify neighborhoods with quite the same number. And so was curious about that. But then also on the education piece, I know that you talked about, you know, being able to get neighborhood associations involved, as well as, you know, possibly even churches. And I'm sure that this is an opportunity for, you know, like community development corporations to also be involved, who have a specific interest in these areas to help develop them. And so I was just curious about that.
Yeah, and we would like to see capacity building to have more CDCs throughout our communities. We think that that is a powerful tool as well. So on the 100, that's just what we looked at when the Center for Community Progress was here, to figure out a way, you know, how can we just start small and then scale it out. We haven't identified where they could be. The issue is citywide, so we will make sure that there is that we're equitable in that approach, so that we can see what works under certain circumstances throughout the city. We do recognize that there are some neighborhoods and districts that that have way more of these than others, but our goal is just to start somewhere so that we can measure our results and see how we actually do with this, with the implementation of this, as well as the costs associated with it, to be able to manage that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilor Abbott.
I probably thought I'd asked all my questions for the day. Okay, so lien foreclosure. Let's say we have a property on 11th Place South and it has a house on it and it has a yard that hasn't been mowed in 20 years, or maybe 25 years. Okay, that property, let's say it goes into lien foreclosure. So what is the process? I mean, the city notifies the owner and the owner ignores us, and then you have the foreclosure. How does the process work? How do people know to bid on the property?
The process there would start with us doing a title search, and then we give notice to everybody with an interest in the property. There's a chance we'll get some redemptions probably at that stage where the city's going to be made whole for our costs. But if not, it goes to the court proceeding. The court proceeding involves a newspaper notice that it's going through the proceeding. And then at the end, the judge will order a sale, and there's an advertisement for the sale process.
Okay, and if the sale price, let's say somebody bids $25,000 and they only owe us $5,000, where does the excess money for the bid go? Does it go to the owners, or?
If there's any left at the end, it would go to the owners, but it covers all of the city's cost, any outstanding taxes, any court cost. And then if there's anything left, it would go to the owners.
Well, I'm really excited about this, and I know that you're going to spread these equally through the districts, and so I have a poster child property for y'all to work on. It's just because everybody on the street is taking care of everything except one miscreant who makes the whole street look like heck. Surely it does. I know we get ignored a lot in District 3, but I don't think that for that long. So, but people complain about it all the time. I just wondered, and then if there was excess money after the when the sale occurred, I mean, there's actually some decent properties out there that people don't, they just let them sit and decay until they're not decent anymore. But, I just wondered how that would work, but this is really exciting, and I'm ready to vote, except I know people still have questions, but I'm pretty happy about this one.
Counselor Tate, you have a question?
My question, and I'm hearing what everybody said, I'm in total agreement with this educational piece, these owners, like, how we drilling down on these owners? It's almost like they escaping. And to Councilor Smitherman's point, constituents want more than one cut. We hear that all the time, like the city maintaining and the owner live around the corner. So I'm just leaning in on these owners, like you cannot let these people get away with this because somebody is bearing this cost and it is not right. Like really, how we drilling down on these owners?
So it's, that's the work that we do in code enforcement every day with finding them. We use several tools to locate the owners. This tool will require us to do that 60-year title search. And so the key is always to find them. A lot of times there are multiple owners. So we recognize that that's the key to enforcement. We do everything we can. I've tried it all. I will call them. I had a family that I found their phone number and sent them a text message of how their property in Graceville Boulevard looked. And the owner lived in Huntsville, and she thought that her brother was taking care of the house here, but he wasn't. And so we go through those measures to see what we can get. And sometimes that soft side of enforcement helps to a certain degree. Me texting her and reaching out every other week to say, hey, what's the status? But she was really surprised. She was floored when she saw how the condition the property was in. And then, of course, in the middle of that, they tried to transfer ownership to someone. And so we see this movement happen a lot with our properties. And so we don't have all the answers, but again, most residents feel that it is the city's responsibility to take care of private properties, but it is draining our resources quite a bit. And so it is the owner's responsibility to take care of those properties, and we'll continue to identify them and hold them accountable. And again, this tool just gives us another way to do that.
And then finally, I hear we talking about this educational piece. We know, some of the people live here. Some may be out of town, making sure, that people get this information. I don't know if you guys have any plans to, put this on the city's website so people can see this stuff in real time. Like, you really need to be taking care of your property, seriously. Because, again, like you said, it drains the city resources when that money can be, used to provide other things. And I, want to echo Councilor Clark's about community land trusts. Like, you get a neighborhoods association, like, buy some land. And, ask, what you can do with it. You may want to build a house, or you may want to plant a community garden. But again, all the educational tools. And I think that's a key component with anything that we do, is making sure that we educate people and bring them into real time and understand and get knowledge and understand, because people are perishing, for lack of knowledge. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Councilor Woods.
Thank you, sir. Quickly, want to ask a question around if this can be applied retroactively, so there are existing liens that have been unpaid more than 6 months, can we move on those, or will it have to be from the passage of this going forward?
Yeah, we can pick up on existing liens if they haven't been foreclosed or haven't been sent to the tax assessor to be added to the tax roll. But anything else is fair game. We can bring those along as we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, somebody make a motion.
Second.
Are we not gonna move it?
Yes, we're gonna move it.
I move for approval or recommendation, or I move for approval.
Second, and now motion to adjourn.
Wait. All right, so this is a motion to recommend to the full council, so we'll get it on the council agenda. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, so it goes to the full council. Now, Council Williams.
Second.